I was cleaning this aquarium and I decided to do a little extra by vacuuming the gravel. I expected to find a lot of dirt, but what I wasn't expecting was an infestation of parasitic worms. This is Anonymous. He's a hybrid cichlid that lives inside of this 125-gallon aquarium all by himself, or so I thought. He's a hybrid between a Dovite cichlid and a jaguar cichlid, two of the most aggressive freshwater fish that we know of, and consequently he himself is very aggressive, and that's why he's by himself. Being alone, he's developed some super fish powers, like being able to change his color in an instant, and he's also mastered the art of biting air. He definitely has one of the boldest personalities of all the fish that I keep. I usually clean my tanks weekly to bi-weekly depending on how dirty they are. Because I have so many big tanks, instead of siphoning each tank with buckets the old-fashioned way, I have come up with a method that makes cleaning almost effortless by simply attaching a garden hose to the tank and draining water directly into my sewage drain. This makes it so that I don't have to babysit my tank while I'm cleaning it. Instead, I could do other things and I really only spend about 5 to 10 minutes siphoning each tank of visible poop and cleaning the glass. People always assume that cleaning so many tanks is a challenge because they imagine me taking the traditional steps like vacuuming each tank. That would be tough and take a lot more time, but in most of my tanks I found a way to get the residents of the tank to do the job for me. Like in most of my tanks I have fish that like to dig, which is great for keeping the gravel stirred up, which prevents dirt and detritus from settling, making it so that I don't have to vacuum the gravel. A good example is inside of my 350-gallon tank. The cichlids in this tank are constantly digging, so when I decided to vacuum the gravel, the water in the siphon was relatively clear compared to what you would normally see if you drive a vacuum into aquarium gravel, proving that the gravel was already cleaned by the fish. In some of my tanks, I can't add digging fish like in my planet tanks, so instead I add digging snails, Malaysian trumpet snails. They burrow in the substrate and they help keep it stirred up. And you might think, how can such a small snail impact the entire tank? But these guys reproduce like rabbits, so imagine 100 snails digging all around in your gravel. Now back to Anonymous' tank. This guy did a nice job digging out his cave, but he doesn't dig for fun like some other cichlids.
Because he's a big bad predator. He don't dig. He a predator. He's not a scavenger.
I can't add other fish to dig for him because, you know, this guy. I try adding snails, but he literally enjoys crushing their shells. Without the essential workers of his ecosystem, I imagine his gravel must be in bad shape, so that's why today I wanted to see how dirty it was by giving him a good gravel vac. It's no surprise that the substrate was filthy. I vacuumed thick clouds of detritus that had settled in the substrate over the months. Now this doesn't mean that he was living in poor conditions. When I do my weekly water changes, I remove most of the harmful waste that builds up. This stuff that you see here is what's left after the waste breaks down, and it really doesn't have a big impact on the water chemistry. It's just ugly and leads to water that's not crystal clear. While I was siphoning, something caught my eye, something microscopic.
Feel it.
There were dozens of these tiny white worms all over the tank. They were on the glass, in the water, out of the water. Some were panicking, and some were just oddly calm. This is very disturbing, especially since I still start the siphon with the suck method. Luckily, I've been in the game for quite some time, and this is not my first rodeo with these little critters. These are planaria, a parasitic flatworm that is very common in the aquarium hobby. They cannot... Wait, let me confirm. Can planaria... Wow. Hold on. So basically I just hit the parasitic lottery. But seriously, these creatures aren't bad, but they aren't necessarily great in my opinion. I haven't added any new fish or plants to this tank in years, so I'm still not 100% sure how they just spawn from out of nowhere. My guess would be that just like other parasites, they're in our tanks from day one, and they just remain dormant until our tanks meet the necessary living conditions for them to thrive. In this case, planaria need excess food and no predators. Even though I don't think I overfeed Anonymous, this guy leaves behind tons of crumbs, and that's more than enough food for planaria to thrive. Also, without smaller fish to prey upon them, they can multiply without limits. I don't like them because they look like they would enjoy eating my brain, but in truth they actually help clean the tank by eating the leftover crumbs. Now there are a few ways to get rid of them, or at least to force them back into dormancy, because you probably can't truly get rid of them. You could add a smaller fish that would eat them, or a smaller fish that would eat the crumbs and leave them without a food source, or you could add snails that would do the same thing and outcompete with them for the scraps in the tank. As I explained, I can't do any of those things because of a certain fish that lives in this tank. I'll try to add some snails again. Malaysian trumpet snails usually do a good job at avoiding predators because they burrow into the substrate and will become nocturnal if necessary. I just need to add them to the tank at night when Anonymous is asleep so that they have a chance to burrow. If that doesn't work, I have no choice but to accept them. Even though they're not pleasant to look at, they're normally nocturnal and you won't see them unless you disturb the substrate. I ended up filling the tank back up with water. It was still murky from stirring up the substrate, but the following day the water was crystal clear. This was a weird video altogether, so erase it from your mind by watching this video of my predator fish hunt goldfish.